last video, we went through the app, bin, and config directories. And I'll close these out, and we'll keep traversing down the list. And the app directory and config are two of the big ones that you're going to be spending a lot of time in. But I'll still spend some time going over these. Right here, we have our DB directory, and some of these are things that you wouldn't touch, like the development and production databases. These ones you're never going to do anything with because they're the actual database and you'd access this through the console. The schema file, on the other hand, is something you're going to be using a lot. You really should never edit this file, and it even says that you shouldn't do it. It gives a pretty strong warning to not do it, and it's because you can have quite a few issues if you try to edit it directly. It's a lot better to create migrations and then have those migrations update this file. But what this file is great for, and I probably will, if I'm working on an application all day, I will probably be in the schema file 100 or so times just referencing all the different things. So every column in the database will be listed here, the data type will be there, any defaults that were placed inside, anything like that would be placed and shown right here. So it's a great point of reference. The seeds file, this is where you could go in and create some objects here to be test data. And they even give you an example here of something you could do. If you had a cities module or model, you could create cities and then you could assign cities to a mayor and do different things like that. We have a project management software, so we're going to be going through and creating some project-based ones, but we will use this file so I can show you exactly how you can create some test data. And the nice thing about this is you can have some test data where if you've ever built applications before, you may have gone and manually typed a bunch of test data into a web form or created a CSV uploader to get test data in, things like that. The seeds file actually does all of that for you very easily, so it's a great tool to use. Next directory is this lib directory, and a lot of people don't really use it very much. The assets is one that I rarely ever use. However, this tasks directory is a very important one because this is where you have the ability to place custom rake tasks. And we will be using this quite a bit because your custom rake tasks are things where you can create some custom behavior that you want called at the command line. So a great example of something that I would put in here is if I connected to an outside API and I wanted to bring in data from that API every day at midnight or something like that, so that I could keep my local database up to date, then I would place a custom rake task that connected the API inside of this folder and then have it called using, if it's on Heroku, using something like Heroku Scheduler or a cron job or something like that, and then it would run that rake task at a scheduled time. It also is good for having those access to those rake tasks if you ever want to do it manually as well. One thing before we keep going, you may notice that Rails put these .keep files here, and you may wonder why that is. And the reason for it is because GitHub, which most people use, and Git in general, it ignores empty directories. So if if Rails created all these directories but didn't put any files in them, then when you push it up or when you add it to your version control, it would actually skip all the empty files. So Rails doesn't want that to happen because say that you created an application then pulled it down onto another machine, you wouldn't want to, if you didn't create a task yet, you wouldn't want this task directory to disappear. And so that's why they have these keep files. You can see there's nothing in them, but by having some type of file in here, then it will it'll make the version, it'll kind of almost trick the version control system into keeping that directory. Going down in the logs, I don't really go into the logs very often, not because they're not helpful, they're incredibly helpful, but I'm just not a fan of the way that Rails does it directly. So usually for logs, I'll connect with a third-party service like typically AppSignal for error logs, and then there's also some other great services like log entries and some different outside services like that will manage all your logs and make it a lot easier to query through them and to do different things like that. However, that they all are here, and you can even see that for that one time where we started up the Rails server, it kept a log of all of that. In the next one, we have our public folder, and this is where you can place some different things like a 404 error page or some different error pages. It places a favicon, and then also very importantly is the robots text file is right here. And so this is where your application can dictate how search engines will access it and that kind of thing. So to edit this, then you can all you have to do is follow some of these instructions. So if you wanted to ban all spiders, or if you wanted to allow all spiders, you can control it all here. Test directory, this is where all the automated tests get placed. I won't go into these because, for one, I don't usually use mini-test. I'll typically use a library like RSpec and Capybara and some of those for automated testing of the Rails applications. Next one's a temp file. You very rarely would ever come in here, so this isn't something we'll get into a lot. Vendor file, this one's a little bit tricky because if you look at this appears to be very similar to if you come to app and go to assets. And that's actually, there's a reason for that, and it's because in previous versions of Rails, this vendor file ran the asset pipeline. And there still are times where this is going to come in handy, not for what we're going to do for our app, but a good example would be if you created a application and you wanted Rails to really only be the API, and you wanted to use a third-party service, or you wanted to use something like a client-side MVC, such as AngularJS or something like that. You need a place to store and access those JavaScript and CSS files, and that's where you would still use this vendor directory. So this does come in pretty handy. Some of the other ones, get ignore file. There's a lot of things that you do not want pushed up to your version control system. One of the top one being any type of environment variables, like different secret keys to connect APIs. You'd put it here, and that way when you push up to GitHub or Bitbucket or any version control system, it would not be shown here anymore. You don't really have to worry about this config.ru. Now the gem file, on the other hand, this is something you're going to be using a lot. So your gem file contains all the gems that are included in the application, and this is where you're going to place outside libraries that are utilized really for bringing in different functionality that you don't want to build in from scratch. And now the gem process for a lot of people can seem a little bit mysterious, and you may think they're kind of these magic things that that help your application work. However, all you're doing, all gems really are, is just Ruby code. And the gem process is a way of versioning and then capturing those Ruby files and those functionalities so that you can bring in a Ruby module and all of its methods and use it easily in the application. If you wanted to, you would never have to use or call in any gems, and you could add them all manually yourself in the application. That's really considered a horrible practice, so you'd never want to do it. But I say that to say that there's no mystery and there's nothing crazy going on with the gems. It's a very cool way of managing your different libraries and different ways of handling your application functionality. Now, gem lock file, this is one you're never going to want to edit directly. What it has is it has all of your different gems, and one thing that you may notice is nested inside of these gems are other gems. So for a good example, if I scroll down, let's pick a good one. So SAS Rails right here is a gem, and we bring in version 5.03. It brings in Rails ties, SAS, sprockets, sprocket Rails, and tilt. And it brings in all these respective versions. Now, where this gem file lock file comes in very handy is there's been times where I've had an application with the weird bug, and the issue was that there were nested gems that were conflicting with each other, and I was able to go through, see those, and then what I did was created some forked version of the gem that removed that conflict. But without this gem lock file, it'd be very difficult to see, and it'd be a very tedious process to see what other gems that brings in. And you're not really going to have to do anything with the rake file. That's just some showing how the rake commands can work, but you're never really going to have to edit that. And the last one is this Readme file. I've already started in the background after the filming's done. I've already started updating this. For me personally, this is where I am going to put the show notes so that you can go to this GitHub and you can go and do things like for the Sublime text video. This is going to show you where you can go download Sublime and have links out and that kind of thing. Typically your Readme file is going to explain how to get the application up and running, how to install it on your local machine, anything like that. If it's for a gem, the Readme is going to get into a lot of different configuration instructions and tell what other dependencies you need to bring in or any kind of hidden gotchas that you need to know about. One thing I did change that's going to be different than yours. By default, Rails uses, I believe it's RDoc for the Readme, and I changed it because I prefer Markdown syntax, and so I changed it to .md, and you can do the same or you can keep the RDoc. It's really completely up to you. So that is it. We've now in the last two videos gone through every one of the directories and what its purpose is for a Rails application, and now we're going to start getting into how to actually get it up and running.